Democratic candidate for the 1st District Congressional seat. Karin Norington-Reaves is the CEO of the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership. She is a litigator, advocate, nonprofit leader, and adjunct law professor. She announced her candidacy in January of 2022 and was endorsed by current 1st District Congressman Bobby Rush, who is retiring after serving 15 terms. As part of our special primary and election coverage, the Chicago Defender spoke with Norington-Reaves about her career, her experience, and why she believes she's the best candidate to represent the 1st District in Washington. Thank you so much for talking to the Chicago Defender.
No, thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
So I guess I want to start off because I know what made you want to run?
So it's something that I've actually thought about for a number of years, to be honest. There are two big things that motivated me. One was community, and then the other was my history of service and my ability, my capacity to actually be in the role. So first, in terms of community, looking at failed policy, how it's impacting our communities, the lack of investment, the challenges that we're facing, and recognizing that there's still so much more that can be done. And also the fact that so many people are disconnected from what really is being done, to impact their day-to-day lives, that people feel so disconnected from elected leadership and don't really know or understand what is being done to improve their lives, or not having tangible evidence for themselves of that actually happening, right? So that's one. Living here in the community, I live a block from the Dan Ryan. I hear gunfire on a regular basis. I have a 17-year-old son. I have a 10-year-old daughter. My fears as a mom, not wanting to be a member of that club of moms who have lost their children to violence in our streets, waking up with that fear and that dread every day, right? And knowing, then shifting to that second part, knowing the knowledge, the education that I've received, the experience that I have, and how broad and deep my policy experience is, marrying those two things, my lived experience as a member of the community, my lived experience as a professional, marrying those two things, recognizing that I have the capacity to give of my time, my talents, my energy, my heart for service, and be able to make a real impact.
Mm-hmm. Can you just share with me a little bit of your position on how, if elected, what you would do to address this issue, not just in Chicago, but as a community as a whole?
Yeah. So I knew that you were going to say that was number one. And before I get to that, I just want to go to your point about not wanting your children to come home and to be here, right? Every single place I have worked for the past 15 years, every single place, I have a colleague, a friend who has lost a child, and more specifically, a son, to violence in our city streets. I have lost family members, all men. And I have a friend who specifically asked his son not to come home for the summer after sending him off to college. And his son wanted to be here, came here, and was hanging out on the front porch with some guys from the neighborhood. And one of those guys was the intended victim, and instead his son was shot in the head and killed. And so this is real for me. This isn't something that is, that I'm looking at from a distance. It is up close and personal. I've gone to too many funerals for my friends' children. The solutions to our problems with respect to the violence is multiple and is layered. it is not just get the guns off the street. It is get to the root cause of why somebody wants to pick up a gun in the first place. Mm. And so that is tied to hopelessness. That is tied to upbringing. That is tied to trauma. And for me, that goes to not just government stepping in to create solutions. It is the public, the private, and the philanthropic sector coming together, creating hyper-local solutions that are rooted in economic and community development. And from my experience, I've led workforce development in the city and this county for over a decade. From my experience, the cornerstone of economic development is workforce development. It is ensuring that people have a deep understanding of who they are, the skills that they bring to the table, and that how those skills get monetized, and that they have a true opportunity to compete in the local economy, to be a part of our local economy, to support themselves and their families. And that may sound real, sort of highbrow, but at the end of the day, it is a lack of hope. It is the residue of trauma that creates the cycle of violence. And until we get to that root cause and start cutting it off at the base, we can't address the issues of violence. And I can tell you from just my own experience in leading workforce development, what I tell my staff all the time is that the money we have is finite. The problems are seemingly infinite. And that's why I'm saying we've got to do that public, private, and philanthropic sector collaboration to really, what I call put an accordion squeeze on all of this in order to address these issues. The violence issues stem from how we fund our education system. So if we are funding everything based on a tax base, if you're poor, if you've got a low tax base, then you're going to have poor schools that don't function well. So we've got to strive for parity there. The violence problems also stem from the fraying of our social fabric. So we've got to invest there, and we've got to invest on the socioeconomic level as well. And so what would I do? I have seen proof that collaboration of the public, private, and philanthropic works because I've done it. I've been leading that for a decade. And so I have also seen the convening power of this seat because I watched Congressman Rush do it with respect to Chatham and creating the Greater Chatham Initiative, right? And so that type of convening power where you get those folks together and become the catalyst for them creating the change, that is the other piece that I want to bring to bear in terms of the solutions. The other piece is around getting these ghost guns off the street and changing our laws. And so we are not going to legislate our way out of all these problems. That's one of the answers. We are also not going to incarcerate our way out of these problems. So it should be against the law for anybody to be able to create a gun, to manufacture a gun from a 3D printer. We have to ban the templates. We have to create micro stamps so that there's serialization of those parts so that they are traced. But then we also have to create more programming for our youth to have them going in the right direction. And for those who go off the path, we have to have stronger reentry programs. I actually co-created and led the Cook County Reentry Council so that we were creating more policy changes, holistic, comprehensive programming so that folks coming out of incarceration actually have a path to go towards economic opportunity as opposed to recidivating. So it is multi-layered. I know that's a long answer, Danielle, but it's multiple layers and multiple problems. And we've got to attack it from multiple fronts in order to have some comprehensive pressure that resolves the issue of violence within our communities.
Yeah, as we kind of talk about this issue, one of the things that the public has become very frustrated with is how government is working right now.
Yeah. Or not working.
Right. And that divisiveness and just kind of this back and forth where nothing's really getting done. It's a lot of debate, but nothing's really getting done. If elected, what is your plan, to operate in the environment that Congress is in right now?
Yeah. So I think there are a number of things at play, and I want to lay out two aspects of a vision that I have. One, in terms of getting things done on the local level so that it's tangible for people. I've seen this work. What I want is participatory policymaking, where people on the ground have an opportunity to convene. And my notion is like community councils, where people on the ground have an opportunity to convene and actually have a say in policymaking, where I bring to them, here are the bills that are up. Here are problems that we have. Here's problems you've articulated to me. Here's my recommendation for a solution. Here's what legislation towards that effect could look like. I want to get your feedback. I want you to participate in helping to shape what I'm saying and doing in DC, right? So that's a way for folks to be heard and a way for them to see the tangible fruits of their labor. So that to be a two-way conversation, and not just a conversation, but for them to really see real action. And my thought is to create them based on topic areas. And we have a lot of expertise in our communities, whether it be in education, whether it be in issues of crime and violence, whether it be in issues of economic development and workforce development. And so to have people participate in that to help shape the legislative agenda and to help shape the actual legislation is one. The other side is with respect to DC, I've actually spent a significant amount of time in DC. I've worked in the Department of Justice. I was in DC just a couple of weeks ago, and I met with the Assistant Speaker of the House, Catherine Clark, and she said to me, "Please tell me you want to be on education and labor." And I said, "All day," right? Because that's my background, workforce development, most recently over the past decade plus, but education. I started off as an educator in public school systems, and so. And I was also an executive director for Teach for America here in Chicago, placing teachers in the classroom. So that is my sweet spot. It is an area of expertise and strength that I bring to the table that no one else in this race can come in, on the first day and have. Also within Congress, they're reauthorizing the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which is the federal law that I've been tasked with implementing for the past decade around workforce development. Who better to go to DC than someone who understands the gap between the legislative intent and what we wind up with, how we have to implement it, and then how it ultimately impacts people. There is a level of divisiveness in DC that exists that has actually just been fomented by the Trump years, for sure. There are, however, Republicans who want to reach across the aisle, who want to collaborate, who want to work with Democrats. What happens is they get ostracized and run out of town on a rail if they do. And so a lot of what is happening in terms of collaboration is happening behind closed doors. And there's work being done at a committee level. There's also work being done at a task force level that even freshmen are creating task forces that allow for the issues to surface and then be vetted up rather through leadership. And so I would take that route as well. We also have to have a representative from our district who is going in with that sense of collaboration and collaborative spirit, and not just to come in from a partisan perspective and dig in heels. The only way that we've been able to really advance things is by building those relationships across the aisle. And I have had that work and that experience. And I actually have the support of existing Republicans who want to see that collaborative effort happening.
Now, you mentioned it earlier, but you would be filling some pretty big shoes. Bobby Rush, his legacy in Chicago is major. What is that for you personally? Just the possibility of filling the shoes of somebody who's made such an enormous impact.
Yeah, it is. It's humbling first and foremost, and exciting to carry on his legacy. and very humbling to be endorsed by him, to have his support, that he sees in my record and in my personal character the capacity to carry on his legacy, not fill his shoes necessarily, right? We're two different people, and I don't want to disrespect his legacy. I don't think anybody can ever be another Bobby Rush. But we have a lot of similarities in that we both have been behind the scenes doing the work. I tell people often, you may not know my name, but my work has touched you in many ways, right? And you don't know my name because I've had my head down doing the work. And he has been that kind of person where his head is down and doing the work. I'm honored to be endorsed by him, but I also recognize the weight of that, the weight of that mantle in terms of history, but also the weight in terms of being responsive to the needs of the people, being about the people, being of service to the people, and always keeping the people at the forefront in terms of any decision making and policy making that happens.
Now, from this race is highly visible, highly watched, just because there's so many Democratic candidates. And while many of you kind of share similar ideals as Democrats, what differentiates you from the other candidates, and what would you tell voters would be, this is why you should vote for me? What differentiates yourself from the other candidates?
What differentiates me most is my experience, my record of accomplishment. So I have a 30-year record as a public servant, and my experience, my policy experience, because what people need to remember is that members of Congress are first and foremost policymakers. And yes, while we represent the districts that we're from, you would also represent the nation in terms of creating sound federal legislation and policy that impacts people's lives for the better. And so when you look at my experience from public education to public health service, public health advocacy for the mentally ill, my work as an attorney with the Department of Justice, with the Citizens Utility Board, doing public utility rate making, fighting against ComEd and NICOR and People's Gas to make sure that consumers are protected, that consumers' wallets are protected. And the work that I've done over the past decade in leading workforce development, I've put over 100,000 people to work, worked with thousands, literally thousands of employers, not an exaggeration at all. There is nobody who comes with that record of accomplishment and record of economic development, economic impact for our communities. We are in a place where those federal laws are being reauthorized. We're in a place where in Congress, we lack that level of expertise, that real level of expertise. And so that's what distinguishes me from the others. I have written the consumer protection laws for the Illinois Telecommunications Act going back 20 years ago. So when I say that folks may not know my name, but they know my work has truly impacted people in this city, in this county, in this state for decades.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you want Chicago Defender readers in particular to know about you and your candidacy?
I want people to know that I am unapologetically a Black woman in every space that I occupy. I have been at the table advocating for us in rooms where I'm the only one who looks like me for decades now. I am a nationally recognized workforce development leader that I have been, as people on my team at the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership used to say, I'm not new to this, I'm true to this. And so, my head has been down doing the real work. I'm a third generation Chicagoan, and I am a mother of two amazing children. I'm also a disability rights advocate. There's no one else in this race that is coming with that perspective. I have a blind child, and I'm also the stepdaughter of a blind man. And I come to this from a space of fighting for our working families. And many of those jobs that I've helped to create are union jobs. And so, what I want people to understand is that they have an option for a sound, competent representative who can lead and who has been leading, and who can make a difference and fight to continue to make a difference for our communities. And that they should really look at the records and not just, this isn't about who you've kicked it with and who you socialize with. This is really about who's most competent to come in and do this job well and right for our communities, because there's a lot at stake if we don't put the right person in that place.
This is Danielle Sanders reporting for the Chicago Defender.